It's back! SpaceX successfully recovers its first super heavy booster, or at least part of it. More launch mount segments spotted. Will this new design be better? Crew 9 launches half empty to be able to return Butch and Suni. Crew Dragon can now land propulsively, and China shows off its new lunar spacesuit. Will it work? My name is Felix, welcome to What About It. Let's dive right in. Starship updates. Welcome back to Starbase. This rocket facility of the future changes faster and faster every day. At this point, it is basically unrecognizable compared to what it looked like just one short year ago, and it's changing even more. While SpaceX waits for the paperwork to be completed for Flight 5, they finally have a plan to move forward. In just the last few months, SpaceX has built nearly an entire launch pad from scratch, with the second Mechazilla Starship tower going from a few pieces on the ground to a gigantic rocket-catching beast. Now this tower is finally getting a launch mount to go along with it. Last week we spotted what we believed to be the first segment of this launch mount, and now we've seen it. Yep, SpaceX has brought in another segment of what is suspected to be the new orbital launch mount for Pad B. Looking at them from the air, we can see they seem identical. We should see even more of these getting rolled in over the coming weeks as SpaceX rapidly approaches a second operational launch mount. Hopefully this one will have a much better design than the last, but from what we can tell, they've already overhauled it quite a bit. Gone are the days of the round launch stool or water tower. Looking at the two components that have already arrived, most signs point to the new launch mount being a square shape rather than the circular shape of the old one. Do you have any ideas for what the new launch mount design will look like? Leave them in the comments, I'd love to see them. Moving on now to the first and currently only operational launch pad for Starship, we can see that it still has a rocket on it. They might roll it back in the meantime, but fortunately for us, that gives us some more time to admire this ship and booster before the flight. Thanks to that, we've gotten some pretty good views of the ship and booster in their flight configuration, and we've managed to spot something interesting. Do you see it? It's missing some tiles. Before you freak out, Ship 29 was in a similar situation with multiple tiles missing before Flight 4. But why? However, this is not an accident. Just like on Flight 4, SpaceX likely left these tiles off for more testing of the underlying ablative heat shield to see if the ship could afford to lose a few tiles before re-entry. We can also spot two locations with missing tiles, and it's clear that they have different materials underneath, with one of them even sporting a blue stripe. It's possible that these are still the same material, just with a different number of ablative layers, but it's hard to tell without specific confirmation from SpaceX. These missing tiles are specifically over a location that is not flight critical after re-entry. Therefore, if the ablative material does not work, the ship will still survive re-entry just like Ship 29 did. However, unlike Ship 29, Ship 30 has a much more advanced heat shield across the entire ship. Ship 29 only had a partial update in specific areas. And now its sibling, Ship 31, which just recently completed a successful static fire campaign, has received that same advanced heat shield. Ship 31 had started this process about a month ago, until teams decided to put it on hold temporarily while the ship went through its static fire campaign. With that now out of the way, teams decided to roll Ship 31 back into the high bay. They built up the scaffolding around the ship and are now beginning work on the heat shield once again. Since SpaceX has already gone through this process with Ship 30 and any complications should now be known, Ship 31 will likely be a quicker job. And closely behind it in the manufacturing pipeline are the Block 2 Starships. Ship 34 has made lots of progress. Last week, after this ship's initial stacking of the payload section in the high bay, it was rolled back into the Star Factory to continue work. While it's here, SpaceX will likely finish installing any internals and possibly finish its heat shield along the weld lines. It's also interesting to see how much headroom it still has sitting inside the Star Factory. SpaceX could even manufacture entire segments that are taller than this inside the factory. It's possible that SpaceX will add machinery to stack this whole segment so it no longer needs to roll back and forth between the high bay and the Star Factory. If that is the case, the high bay will almost entirely be replaced by other Star Factory parts. It will be interesting to see what SpaceX decides to do with this bay. After all, we know SpaceX's plan on building a third megabay, and it's possible it could go right where the high bay is if SpaceX isn't getting enough use out of it. It's just logical to do. With SpaceX rapidly building new vehicles at this current pace, they are building them faster than they can fly them, which means they need some space before they go to space. Unfortunately for some of the older prototypes, that means they need to go. Booster 4, which was the first booster to be launch ready when Ship 20 was stacked to top it, was scrapped earlier this year, however some of it remained. Although most of its components were torn apart and hauled away, its aft section and engines were left while SpaceX removed some of the more valuable components. After all of the engines were removed, it was only a matter of time before SpaceX would finish scrapping the last pieces of this booster. And now they've done it. Goodbye. The last remaining segment was removed from its stand and is now being taken apart. This was the last booster to have the older version 1 Raptor engines, and in this case it only had 29. With this booster now gone, it marks the end of an era as Starship begins to move from a proof of concept into a more mature stage of development. While we say goodbye to this older booster which never got a chance to fly, we also say hello to another booster that we never thought we'd see again after it flew. Booster 11, the first booster to successfully perform a soft touchdown in the water, has now returned from its flight. Or at least some of it has. After this booster sank to the bottom of the ocean, it was assumed we would never see it again, but clearly SpaceX had other plans. Just a few days ago, the ship Haas Ridgewind returned from its fishing trip in the Gulf of Mexico, carrying this incredible piece of hardware with it. Shortly after this ship made it to Brownsville, SpaceX began loading these pieces onto trucks before transporting them to Massey's. It's unclear why SpaceX decided to transport these to Massey's instead of the Sanchez site, but it might only be temporary and these pieces could soon be moved elsewhere. In the meantime, we can see that SpaceX did end up bringing more pieces of the booster to the surface. Along with the main piece which we had known about, there are also many smaller pieces scattered across the area. We can also see that SpaceX decided to cut the larger piece in half, likely to facilitate easier transport. SpaceX engineers likely want to focus on the Raptor engines and parts of the plumbing that fed them, so cutting this in half is fine. The likelihood of it flying again is rather low. It's possible we may even see SpaceX tear this booster apart even more to get to some parts deep within for better views. Getting this bird's eye view is spectacular. Did you know you can take a helicopter ride over Starbase and get the same views as in our videos? Visit redlineheli.com/Felix to book your helicopter ride over Starbase with $25 off. Give it a try when you're in the area, it is unforgettable. Booster 11 seems to be of great interest to SpaceX with all the effort they've put into recovering just these few parts, and it looks like they're not done yet. Haas Ridgewind is back on the move. Thanks to maritime tracking and the space engineer on X, we can see that the ship has yet again returned to Booster 11's resting place. Hopefully, this fishing trip is as successful as the last. It's likely SpaceX will aim to recover more of the engine section, as that's where they can get the most data from. The top part would be of high value as well. It could show how stressing the hot staging is on the forward section of a Super Heavy booster. Hopefully, they will even be able to recover the engine that malfunctioned during landing, but we will just have to wait for this ship to return to port to see what treasures it's bringing with it. Crew Dragon, currently the only operational crew capsule in the United States, has been on a winning streak since its inception. And now they've done it again with Crew 9, but there are multiple twists. And before I tell you about that, we've looked into our channel metrics, and there are over 2 million returning monthly viewers who have not subscribed yet. Help us improve the channel even further by double checking that you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our updates. And while you're at it, give us a like and become a wise supporter. Why? Because you'll gain access to a massive amount of extra content. With it, you get access to daily new Starbase photo galleries, including all those we've posted so far, satellite, aerial and ground photos, more than 400 posts in the past 2 years alone, with up to 7 picture galleries per week, insights, chats with me, you name it. Thank you so much, you rock. Alright, back to Crew 9. It's on its way to play Uber for the Starliner astronauts Butch and Suni. On the evening of September 28th, despite a hurricane that had passed through Florida just the day before, Falcon 9 once again lit its engines, this time carrying 2 astronauts aboard SpaceX's Crew Dragon Freedom. This marked the 4th time this capsule has made the trip to space. And this flight also marks the first time a Crew Dragon has flown to space with only 2 people, since its second demonstration mission with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley back in 2020. That was 4 years ago. Time's flying when you're having fun. That was 4 years ago. This time the 2 crew members are Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbunov. They have successfully docked to the International Space Station, where they will stay for the next 6 months, along with the 2 crew members of the Boeing crew flight test. Arguably, all of this news isn't even the big news. After all, Crew Dragon launches are becoming more and more routine, with Polaris Dawn having launched just a few weeks ago and FREM 2 going up next, followed by Axiom 4. Routine crewed flights several times a year. Instead, there was a pretty groundbreaking announcement just before this launch during the pre-flight conference. NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch announced that during the landing of Crew 8, which will be returning just after Crew 9 docks, as well as for the landing of Crew 9 a few months later, there will be an extraordinary addition to the safety measures. If there is a problem with the parachutes for either Crew Dragon, then as a contingency, the capsule's Super Draco thrusters will fire. What? They are normally used to pull the capsule away from a rocket during the event of a malfunction at launch, and can now be used during landing as a way to slow the capsule down just before it impacts the water. This is huge. Even though this is just a contingency, it shows that NASA trusts SpaceX as well as the Crew Dragon to be reliable enough to propulsively land with crew during an emergency. As surprising as this may seem, this was actually the original plan for Crew Dragon when it was first developed. SpaceX had the goal of propulsively landing a Dragon as the main form of landing without parachutes. Eventually, this was scrapped because SpaceX decided to divert the resources needed to fully develop the propulsively landing Crew Dragon into another project. Can you guess what project that vastly bigger ship was? Now this capability has returned. This will greatly increase Crew Dragon's safety even beyond its already high track record. No other crew capsule has complete redundancy in its parachutes, even if all of them fail. However, it was also revealed that this would only be used if all the capsule's parachutes failed, because Dragon could theoretically land with just a single parachute, making this scenario highly unlikely. Still a nice backup to have, and it is making this vehicle even safer than it already is. Additionally, with Polaris Dawn now safely back on Earth, teams at both NASA and SpaceX have had time to analyze this incredible mission and learn what the Dragon capsule is truly capable of. Along with that, SpaceX also released quite a bit of footage from the Polaris missions, including a beautiful view of Earth from the highest point seen since the 1970s. With every mission, Dragon capsules prove their capabilities and reliability while pushing the envelope and doing what many never thought possible for a private company. With commercial companies like SpaceX taking on more roles from NASA and freeing up some of its budgets for other tasks, they may finally be able to move forward with more ambitious goals, such as returning to the moon. Although even with private industries freeing up some of NASA's budgets, they still have a relatively small budget overall, especially for the ambitious goals they'd like to achieve. And it doesn't look like that small budget is going anywhere. NASA's new budget authorization bill has just passed the House with only a moderate increase. NASA budgets are fun, but you know what's even more fun? Let's talk about vacation planning for a second. I've got my plans set for October 12th. How about you? Still looking for a nice thing to do? Come to the 2024 Space Creator Day at the Technical Museum Speyer in Germany. I'll be there too. The Space Creator Day is all about meeting your favorite space creators. Started in 2022, this celebration of and for the space community has quickly become an institution. It is Europe's biggest space community event. Besides meeting me and plenty other Team Space content creators, it's also a chance to meet with companies from the aerospace sector. Boost your careers, look into aerospace education and network with the important people. or visit a workshop and learn more about the space industry and our future. I am pleased to announce that you can get 10% off your ticket purchase if you go to spacecreatorday.com/Y and use my code Y10 at checkout. Y will be there with 4 team members and we'd love to see you there too. What are you waiting for? Code Y10, October 12th, let's meet. Alright, back to NASA's budget problems. With the Artemis program expected to require a lot more money to maintain, it is clear that with a budget this size, NASA will have a harder time returning to the moon and keeping all of their other scientific missions going. This new authorization bill allocates around $25.2 billion to NASA for all of its missions. This is almost $200 million less than what NASA requested, with most of the gap unfortunately coming from science missions. Come on! Although $25.2 billion sounds like a lot, this is only a minor increase of around $400 million from 2024's budget and is still less than 2023's budget. It gets even worse when looking at inflation, as NASA's budget consistently underperforms it. That $400 million increase isn't even enough to cover the cost increases associated with inflation, so in a matter of speaking, this is yet another budget cut for NASA. All of this comes at a time when NASA's goals and the resources needed to achieve them do not match. NASA's current goal is to return people to the moon by 2026. Within this budget, this likely will not be achievable without some massive shifts in the aerospace industry. Some of NASA's partners are eating up all the money with constant cost overruns and delays. However, there may be one thing that can mobilize the government to begin funding NASA to a greater extent: competition. Specifically China. And this competition is heating up quicker. Take a look at them flexing, literally. They've now revealed their own lunar spacesuit. This design clearly shares a lot of similarities with the spacesuit they use on their Tiangong space station, with the exception of the legs, which have been upgraded to allow for movement on a solid surface instead of just in space. With the announcement of the new spacesuit, China also showed off its movement capabilities, proving that this suit is capable of a very large range of motion. It is important to remember that mobility is one of the most important things to consider when designing a new spacesuit. It's a bit like a fully inflated balloon, easy to bend when empty, not so much when filled. For spacesuits that are only intended for zero gravity, especially the legs aren't important. Very little mobility is designed into them. However, if you want to be able to walk, it is a whole different story. And it is a bit more difficult than you may think. Spacesuits need to be pressurized, and that pressure makes regular movements much more difficult. This poses huge design challenges. For the same reason it is harder to crush a full soda can than an empty one, air pressure can be hard to overcome. That is why many spacesuits have bearings that allow for much easier movement. Your solution is there, but it's not easy to design. A good example of this is SpaceX's spacesuit, which just had its debut on Polaris Dawn. You can see how some movements seem quite difficult while others are much easier. For China's new suit, they've added multiple bearings across the legs to allow for easier movement. Let's make a comparison to NASA. Is China doing a good job? It isn't quite to the same extent as NASA's new XEMU, which has one massive bearing across the waist. China's suit is missing this waist ring, so it's not a direct copy, even if it looks similar. This new development shows the progress that China has already made towards its goal of landing on the moon. Currently that goal is set for 2030, which seems like a long way away, but if there is one thing that China has shown, it's that it is very good at hitting its deadlines. Currently, NASA's plan is to beat China back to the moon by 4 years. However, as China is showing increasing commitments to this goal and the US's commitment appears to be decreasing, the current 4-year gap may end up shrinking a bit. Here's an example. Way back at the beginning of the Artemis program, preliminary reviews placed the launch date for Artemis 2, the next mission to launch, between 2019 and 2021. Then the launch date was delayed to 2023. Then the launch date was targeted for November 2024 but was delayed again. Now it is set for September 2025, with first questions already coming up if that date can be kept. And Artemis 2 is not the moon landing. That would be Artemis 3 and Starship, which is supposed to land the astronauts on the moon, but they are currently stuck in permission jungle. At the current pace, it still doesn't appear China will beat the US back to the moon, but this race is definitely getting more interesting. That's it for today. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe for more. This is what fuels the algorithm, and this is how you can help us for free. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. A new Raptor design and our epic Flight 5 designs are both up. Link is in the description and in the card you should see now. They are selling faster than we can process the orders. And if you want to train your space IQ even further, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. Into a more mature stage of development. The algorithm. Situation. Ablative layers. Blah 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 blah. What?